Welcome to For the Church, a podcast for the flock of Zion Presbyterian Church in Columbia, Tennessee. We want to help you think biblically about everyday matters. Zion Church exists to join Jesus in his mission to reach people with the gospel, and then to equip his people to worship and to serve. I'm your host, Keaton Paul, and joining me is my regular conversation partner and co-host, Seth Scruggs. So once more, we've been spending the summer at the movies, and as summer winds down, we still have movies yet to go. And now we turn to a movie that was like truly near and dear to my heart, and I'm not an emotional movie watcher in the least bit, or an emotional really anything. But this one got me. But before we get there, hey Seth, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing great. I got a cup of coffee.
Oh yeah.
Got my friend Keaton. It's a good time.
Some may say it's even a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
You would say that it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Look at you with the segues. That's what we're talking about this week. This week we're talking about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. It is a 2019 film directed by Marielle Heller. It stars Tom Hanks and Matthew Rhys and several other people. Synopsis, I'll just read the log line.
There you go.
Lloyd Vogel is a cynical journalist and a new father who has an estranged relationship with his own father. When he is assigned a profile of beloved children's television host Fred Rogers, his life is forever changed. So this is somewhat of a true story. So obviously Fred Rogers is a real person, and it is based on the story of a profile that was done by a journalist named Tom Janode, and he, very similar to Lloyd in the movie, was kind of known for his like very acerbic kind of profiles, specifically profiles that he where he was not very kind to his subjects. So he was assigned this profile of Fred Rogers, and ultimately became friends with Mr. Rogers, and they were friends through the rest of Mr. Rogers' life. And so that's really the story of the film, right? And I'll just start with, did you like it? I know the answer to this question.
I loved this movie so much. So like a little insight into my life. We typically, Destiny and I, like on Fridays, we normally just look for a movie to watch because, by the end of the week, I'm worn out. I don't want to leave the house. So we make frozen Costco pizza. Don't judge us for our health decisions. Okay. It's very convenient. So we make frozen Costco pizza and pick a movie. And normally, like, there's like no rhyme or reason whatsoever to the movies that we pick. Most of them are like, are pretty lighthearted because it's the end of the week and I don't want to think much. And at one point we were scrolling through and I saw that the I called it the Mr. Rogers movie. The Mr. Rogers movie was on some sort of streaming service. I forgot which one it was. And I was like, well, let's watch Mr. Rogers. Also, backstory. I've always really kind of wanted, at least my adult life, post seminary, I came home, I got a job teaching at the school, and it was at that moment that I was like, yeah, I want to be Mr. Rogers. That's really just who am I trying to become? Who is my hero? Mr. Rogers is my hero. Cardigans and all. And so we put on this movie and we're watching it, and it doesn't take very long before I'm like pretty sucked in. And again, I'm not like a super emotional movie watcher. You can think of like the classic movies that'll make pretty much anybody tear up a little bit. Where the Red Fern Grows, Old Yeller, Marley and Me.
Dog movies
where the dogs die. And like I'm not super affected by that. I mean, it's like I love dogs too, but what? Okay, it's fine. or any of the other ones, A Walk to Remember, whatever. We could go down the list. But I don't normally cry at movies. The movies just don't hit me that way. And I find myself like midways through the Mr. Rogers movie, and nothing's sad. Well, there is sad stuff, but like nobody dies.
Yeah, someone does die.
Well, somebody does
but not
die.
in like a super dramatic way.
That's right.
Not on screen.
Yeah. Okay. That's right. But like that's not like a climactic moment in the movie, and that was not why I was crying because people were dying or anything like that. I was just crying because I'm looking at Mr. Rogers and going, I wish I were that kind.
Yeah.
I wish, this is terrible, I guess, for a pastor to say. So here's just a little insight into my heart. I wish I cared for people as much as Fred Rogers cared about people.
Yep.
Which, maybe that's actually a good thing. I would
you gotta have aspirations.
Yeah. You got to hope for something, and have goals. I hope that one day I will care about people as much as Fred Rogers cared about people. And watching him care so deeply about people just moved me to tears. And maybe that's just because of, the world we live in and whatever, social media and just how people treat one another now, that you see genuine kindness and you go, I'm not crying, you're crying. Oh wow, the allergies are really bad. This pollen is just crazy these days. Yeah. So yeah, all that to say, I loved it. I will go back and watch it again if this were the good old days. In the 90s, this is the kind of thing that I would go to Blockbuster and rent like 4 times and then finally buy it.
Yeah.
On VHS. VHS is an old apparatus for watching movies to anyone under the age of 20, probably 20.
Probably. I do think that our demographic listening definitely knows what a VHS is.
I guess. There's the social awareness. Yeah, there probably aren't any Gen Zers or Gen Alphas. I guess it's the next one. Listening to this. If you are, hey, leave a comment and say represent Gen Alpha. We may bring you on the show. We've got questions for you.
a lot of questions.
So anyway, all that to say, like this, and I will go so far as to say, like, this isn't just one of, the movies that whenever you gave me the list, I was really excited for. This is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah.
I love this movie as well. Yeah. I think that, so I saw the documentary Won't You Be My Neighbor, which I also highly recommend.
I do need to see
and
that.
I think that, and we'll probably dig into this a little bit more. What's really interesting about this movie is that it doesn't really try to tell you who Fred Rogers is. It's not a biopic in the traditional idea. So you take something like a Walk the Line or something like that, where it's kind of like this whole life. We'll show you as a kid and we'll show you growing up, and then we'll show. It doesn't do that at all. It really Fred Rogers is, in a sense, incidental to the plot of the movie. The main character, the protagonist of the film, is Lloyd, this journalist character, and it's really about what happens in his life as he's kind of wrestling with this change, and he's wrestling with this kind of new influence, and he's realizing, as all of these things converge, what he really wants out of his life. And some of the themes that we're going to talk about. And I think that is a really, really excellent choice. Because there's this idea that, like, we all kind of know who Fred Rogers is.
Right.
And the movie takes that for granted a little bit, even starting like an episode of the show. And so there's this idea, we won't dig super far into it, but it's this idea of intertextuality, and I'll put a link to a video essay where you can kind of learn a little bit more about it. But really, it's the idea that we all we live in this like pop culture saturated time. And we talked about this last week with Everything Everywhere All at Once, but we live in this pop culture saturated time. And because we do, there are certain things that you can kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
And this movie does that in two ways. Number one, it takes the fact that you kind of know who Fred Rogers is for granted. And then it also takes for granted the fact that you know who Tom Hanks is. And you kind of have this relationship with Tom Hanks as an actor, whether it's Toy Story or Big or, you know, any of his films over the years. It kind of takes for granted that you have this relationship with him. You kind of know who he is. And the fact that he's playing Fred Rogers is another kind of layer to that. As both of them are kind of like these American icons. So yeah, I like this movie a lot. I think it's beautifully shot. Yeah. I love a lot of the choices it makes as far as they do a lot of stuff to make certain segments feel like an episode of the show and of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I love those touches. They shot on the same exact kind of cameras that they shot on for that show. Okay. And so that's cool. It's something that is very difficult to fake, that kind of look. Yeah. And so they shot directly on that format, and I think it's very effective. Yeah. And so let's jump into some of the core themes of the movie. So one of the thing that I had kind of forgotten since the last time I saw it was it really is organized like an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right? Yeah. So the movie opens, again, playing on that like intertextual idea, like, you know, kind of the rhythm of an episode of Mr. Rogers. Right. Most people do, if they're like of a certain age. Well, and I think, you know, maybe I'm the tail end of that, like having grown up on some reruns and things. But
if they don't know it, you should go watch an episode of Fred Rogers. You'll feel better. I really think you'll feel better. Absolutely.
And so each of the episodes of his show were kind of built around a singular theme, right? Yeah. And that's really how the movie opens is he says, okay, we're going to talk about forgiveness. Yeah. And that really is a core theme of the movie. And that's it was one of the most, it kind of took me back for a second. So I was like, oh wow, I forgot that was so, in a sense, on the nose. Right. Which could be a very bad thing. Like, it's a very delicate line to kind of walk when you begin your movie by saying, okay, we're going to talk about forgiveness. Yeah. Anyway, here's this character and he needs to forgive someone. And who does he need to forgive? He needs to forgive his dad. Yeah. And discussing the kind of difficult nature of that. And I think that if it didn't have the trappings of this kind of Mr. Rogers Neighborhood thing, it would feel very like in your face and kind of fall flat. Time. Yep. Yeah. No. So the idea then is like, so Lloyd really needs to connect with his dad and forgive his dad. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that's the core movement of the film, is moving from this place of unforgiveness to this place of forgiveness with his dad. Yeah. And in doing so, being able to kind of overcome his issues with his dad so that he can become a better father. Like those are the two kind of things happening in Lloyd. And Mr. Rogers is kind of the impetus for that, right? Yeah. One of the things that I really loved about that, right, is that it's very beautifully portrayed. Yeah. One of the things that I think is so beautiful about it is that it's incredibly messy. Yeah. It is. And there, again, that's such a delicate line to walk when you say, we're going to talk about forgiveness. And first of all, you say it out loud at the beginning of your movie. But secondly, forgiveness is such it's very easy to go saccharine. Yeah. And melodramatic and over the top. And I think in the hands of lesser filmmakers and lesser actors, that's exactly what would happen. But Matthew Rhys and Chris Cooper, who play Lloyd and his dad, Jerry, they don't play that kind of saccharine note. Yeah. And so even at the end, as you see Lloyd moving toward forgiveness, right? So his dad is dying. Yeah. And he decides to go stay with his dad basically until his dad passes. Yeah. And you see these moments of them sitting together, like watching TV or talking. And there's a beautiful scene where Lloyd wakes up in the middle of the night with his baby, and he's warming up a bottle, and his dad is awake. And so they have this kind of late night talk.
Yeah.
And again, that could very easily veer into like very sappy.
Yep.
But instead, it kind of paints us a picture of what forgiveness actually looks like, right? And so there are these moments where they're sitting there and he's like, they're kind of bickering over like, "What do you want, a beer?" I don't want a beer. I want, if it'll make you happy, I'll drink it, but I don't. And they kind of this bicker back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And so even it could have been portrayed as like they've been estranged for 20 years and now they're kind of just everything's rosy.
That's right.
But there's not like that 20 years still happened.
Right.
And I think that's something that's really, really beautiful and really, really important. Like they're still trying to overcome their differences.
Right.
It's very honest.
Yeah.
And it's very real, but it also is still very hopeful. They're able to, in these last months of his dad's life, have some sort of a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciated that too, just because, you know, sometimes for maybe it's, well, people like sentimental things, understandably. And sometimes it's maybe for the sake of just the sheer length of the story. You know, you got to get to the forgiveness quickly so you can get to the, you know, happily ever after, you know, which again can be fine, but just sitting in the reality of like, no, that's actually how real life typically works when it works out well. So, you know, the just the realness of how forgiveness often works, forgiving, you know, a parent who, you know, has mistreated you in some way, while still also being like, yeah, it's still pretty weird to talk to my dad.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did that well, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, and I think it's something powerful where it's so nuanced in a world where nuance is not really appreciated, in the sense that, you know, especially in the kind of Christian subculture that I'm sure many of us tend to be in, whether by choice or not.
Right.
There's this movement towards like positive and encouraging. Right?
Whoa, easy now, because I think that's a particular.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. But there's a movement toward that, right? And I have nothing against necessarily being positive and encouraging, but when we have a very two-dimensional view of what that means, and a fake it till you make it kind of mentality.
That's right.
We miss this, right? This kind of messiness, and we have to have that, like, so that when you get to those moments, right? Because everyone's going to hit a moment where something is awkward or doesn't, you know, you apologize and someone doesn't accept it, or you don't want to accept someone else's apology, and you're working through these things and you're trying to overcome these these things that are in your way. Yeah. And if you are stuck in this very two-dimensional mindset of like, you know, without nuance, then you either gloss over everything and refuse to acknowledge the hurt that you've had, or you don't, you end up just being bitter. Yeah. And I think that that's something overall this movie does really well, is holding in tension these two things, like the very, very good in life and the very, very bad in life. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and you appreciate that so much. You know, because oftentimes, it's really hard to do, which is why a lot of movies don't hold them in tension. You know, it's really, it's really easy to do. Everything is bad. That's not super hard. Yeah. I think most people just gotta live in that space anyway. And it's also pretty easy to do. Everything is awesome. You know, not many people live in that space, but like we dream in that space. But
Right.
like reality being, well, you know, yeah, things can be really bad, but also at the exact same moment, they can be absolutely wonderful
Right.
all at the same time.
And I think that was something, just to tie it back to Fred Rogers as a person,
Yes.
something that he did so well was communicating, you have emotions,
and
sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. And they sing, what do you do with the mad that you feel in the movie? And it's like, well, what do you do with that? What do you do with it? And it makes you feel a certain way. And how do you handle that? Something he did really well.
Yeah, no, they did that phenomenally well, and I'm so glad they brought that out. One of the reasons, it's so good. It's
just such a good movie. And so, if on that note of like what Mr. Rogers did well, if there's a thesis to his work as a whole, I really think that it's human dignity.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And there's a great section in the "Won't You Be My Neighbor" documentary that really digs into this, and digs into the idea that he would tell kids they were special.
Yeah,
right. And that's a hot button issue in our day and age. That
I guess
Mr. Rogers, he's the problem. He told all these kids they were special. But if you listen to what he says, and in this movie, I think perfectly handles it.
Yeah.
Really, he digs into what it actually means that we're special, right? And just for context, Fred Rogers was a Presbyterian minister.
He was.
He went to seminary. I don't think he ever was ordained. I don't think he got up to his ordination and then. So. Yeah,
he might have been ordained. Yeah, okay. I think he was ordained actually.
Yeah. So maybe he never went into the pastorate because of the show. But so basically, these two things kind of coincided, and he ultimately chose being on TV instead of being a pastor, because that was in the days where you had to choose between those two things, and so as opposed to now.
Shoot.
And so, but because of that, right?
Yeah.
One of his core things is not is that humans are made in the image of God.
Yeah, that's right.
And really what we see in him and in this movie is a lived theology of what it means to be made in the image of God.
Right. Yep.
And so when he would say you are special, he wasn't saying blindly. Like Mr. Rogers is not ignorant of human nature. And again, one of the things that this movie does really well depicting is that he was flawed.
Oh, yeah.
And he was aware of those flaws.
Right.
And every day that he lived was trying to keep those flaws in check.
Yeah.
And one might say keep those sins in check.
Yep.
And to live in a way that was honoring to God and to other people. And one of the thing that I think maybe all of us have a certain doctrine that like flips a switch in us, right? That kind of causes us to see the world differently.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's more than one. Sometimes it's just one. I think for Mr. Rogers, one of those things was everyone is made in the image of God.
Yeah. Yeah, for
and
sure.
If everyone is made in the image of God, everyone is unique and is crafted.
Yeah.
And therefore is special.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily entitled to, to be coddled. And I don't think that anything that he did would lend itself to that.
Right.
But what it did say is you're special.
Yeah.
Because you were created in a certain way, and I like you the way that you are.
Yep.
To put it another way, you're fully known and fully loved.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's good.
Yep.
That's a very, very, very good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's the part that, is just so special about really the movie and the person was just his intention, because it takes intentionality to have that posture towards people.
Right.
I think, just because of indwelling sin and who we are as humans, our natural tendency is to be in competition, to win, to be number one at all costs, including, pushing other people aside or, bringing them down or something like that. And so, the intentionality that says, I'm just going to recognize people as who they truly are, as image bearers of God, and therefore intrinsically special. It's just so rare and refreshing that when you see it, you go, man, that's a special person who is able to see how special people are. Yeah, man, absolutely.
Well, and so let's take that into like why make this movie now, right? Like Mr. Rogers has not been with us for more than 20 years at this point. Yes, it's a legend, but like, I mean, how many kids are still watching Mr. Rogers? Like, right. So why make it? And I think, first of all, we're hitting a point, and this kind of happens just in the film industry, where people who were kids at a certain time like are now in the position where they can make things, right? And so they start to make things that reflect on like their childhood. Yes. And so we're hitting this kind of point where the people who were really invested in Mr. Rogers' kids are now adults, and so they connect with that. I think another thing, though, is that like human dignity matters. Yeah. And we live in an age that is constantly dehumanizing us. Right. Whether it's how people speak to one another, or the fact that we're all on technology all the time, or the fact that we're on technology all the time, which makes us not see other people, which means that we treat people terribly. Like, it all feeds itself, right? Yep. And in an age, and you add in virtual reality and artificial intelligence and all these things, right? What it means to be human, I think, matters now more than ever. Yep. And people are searching for that. Yep. Absolutely. And so, we long to be seen. Yeah. We long to be known. We long to be loved. Yeah. That's why Mr. Rogers is popular in the first place. Yep. And so as we enter into this age where we're constantly being dehumanized, a movie that reminds us that, like, no, how you are is good. Yep. Who you are as a person is good. And we're gonna temper that in a minute with some like Christian theology to kind of talk about that. There you go. But I think that's why it appeals to a audience, both Christian and secular, is because everyone wants to know that they are known, seen, and loved. That's right. Yeah. And where you find that is another thing altogether. Yep. But ultimately, that's what everyone's looking for. Yeah. And so this movie that reaches out and says, you are known, you are seen, you are loved. Yeah. And also encourages you to reflect on the people who made you who you are. That's a moment, a very, very powerful moment in the film. Yeah. Where the movie stops. Yeah. For a minute. That's right. And Mr. Rogers says, I want you to think of the people who made you who you are. Yeah. I think the phrase he uses is loved you into being. That's right. Yeah. And in that scene, he's sitting there, I think, with the guy, they're in some diner, and he's saying that to the guy, but he's also speaking it to the camera. Yes. And then he there's the pause, and it, because in movies, anytime there's like a pause, it feels like a really long time. Yeah. I have no idea how actually long the pause is, but Tom Hanks just stares into the camera, and there's, just kind of silence. And I'm like, that's so good. Yeah. And because it forces you as an audience member to also think about that. That's right. Yeah. And so it's a brilliant touch. Yes. But again, like, I think that's why it connects with people, is because not only are we reminded as we're watching this movie, you're loved. Yeah, that's who right. You were made in a particular way. Yeah. And you are loved. Yeah. But it's also like, think about the people who loved you. Mm-hmm. And remember that they were important and they were made a certain way. Yeah, absolutely. So I think I can feel the reformed thoughts that are coming at us as we talk about this, because there's a very particular doctrine in Reformed theology that seems on the surface to come in direct conflict with what we're talking about right now. The idea that everyone is special and how they were made is good. And so I'm going to start by saying that the Bible affirms this, right? The Bible affirms the uniqueness of human beings made in the image of God.
Yeah.
You know, God looks at people, he says, I'm going to make you in my own image.
That's right.
I'm going to design you in a very particular way. And I'm going to make you in my own image. Yeah. And then he says, it's very good.
Yeah, that's right.
How I made it is very good.
Yep.
To quote another children's television show.
Oh boy.
VeggieTales, God made you special and he loves you very much. Like there's God did that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this is a very, very important thing to affirm.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we're going to turn into Gnostics and we're going to hate our bodies and hate our flesh.
Yeah.
And we do have to hold that intention with the doctrine of total depravity.
Yeah,
so this idea that we are born, that we are sinful because of the fall. So God makes us, we're very good, and we are fallen. Yeah. Right? And so both of those things are true at the same time. So this is kind of paraphrasing something that a professor said to my class in college, Dr. Kofid, just in case he hears this, I want to give him credit. The doctrines of total depravity and Imago Dei, the idea that we're made in the image of God, mean that humans are capable of both great evil and great good. So both of these things are true, right? And and it's not about does one outweigh the other in some sort of yin-yang thing. Right. It's that both of these things are true that we have to keep in our proper perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And and just really kind of stemming from that reality. I mean, one, people, like, there's a big difference between total depravity and utter depravity. Are we totally depraved in that every aspect of our humanity is fallen in the fall? Yes. Does that mean that every aspect of our humanity is as fallen to the furthest extent as it possibly could be? Well, no. I mean, there are aspects where, there's still goodness. We haven't lost the image bearerness. It's a marred image bearerness. So that's one thing. But also, secondly, just the work in the history of redemption. Humanity must have intrinsic good by way of the covenant, if for no other reason, simply by the fact that the eternal Son of God took on flesh, took on a true humanity in order to redeem humans. And so, you have to lock those together of, we definitely are fallen. That's biblically true. But also there's great integrity as image bearers of God in a way that nothing else in creation has by a long shot. I mean, there's nothing else. The angels are not image bearers of God. We are. Jesus doesn't, become an angel in order to redeem angels. He becomes human because, that's part of how the Lord has established this created world and the manner of the covenant. He made covenant not with Gabriel or Michael. He did so with Adam, the man. And he redeems us not by contra Mormons and that sort of thing, not by Gabriel or Michael or whatever the other one's name is. That they say he does so by sending his son to, in the fullness of time, be born of woman and under the law to redeem those who are under the law. So, both of those things go hand in hand. And, the Bible certainly has no problem saying, both of these are true. And so we really can't have a problem with it either.
Yeah. And I think it's key to how we relate to people.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, when you look at what we're all looking for, this need to be known and loved and seen, can only find it's rest.
Yeah.
To paraphrase our friend Augustine,
Yep.
in Christ.
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
And so when we look at that, and to your point about how Fred Rogers would look at the world
Yeah.
with this kind of compassion,
Yeah.
it's because he was recognizing what everyone needs, and he says it in a way in the movie is like what everyone's looking for is they need to know that they are loved as they are.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that as they are is perfect.
Right.
It doesn't mean that as you are is as everything you should be.
Yeah.
Necessarily.
Right.
But he says, in the movie it's a real video that's actually in the documentary. But he's talking about how like kids are so often appreciated for what they will be.
Yeah.
Right? They will be this one day. They will be that one day. We need to appreciate them for who they are now.
Yeah.
That's all anyone's looking for.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's everyone's starting point, because you can only start from where you are right now.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that we're going to be, we are 100% everything we should be, and we never will be this side of heaven.
Right.
Just spoiler.
Yep.
But it does mean that everyone that we see is created by God in his image, and therefore should be treated as such.
Yeah,
and that kind
right.
of demands a certain level of respect, no matter if we like the person, no matter if we agree with the person on every single thing that we've ever heard them say, or if we disagree with them.
Yeah.
We have to start from a place of kindness and compassion, and recognizing ultimately everyone's looking for the same thing, whether it's you or me or, some guy you meet on the street.
Yeah.
And as Christians in Jesus, we are fully known and loved.
Yeah.
And so this thing that made Mr. Rogers appealing, it makes this movie appealing, it makes so many things in the world appealing.
Yeah.
Is this draw towards being known and loved.
Yeah.
And in Jesus, that's the only place that we are fully known and fully loved for everything that we are and everything we're not.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's how we have to approach other people. I think if there's anything you can kind of take from this movie, it's that everyone's looking for this one thing, really, ultimately. And we have that.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
In Jesus.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That'll preach. I have nothing to add to that.
I don't think I'm allowed to preach, but
no, but I said that would preach.
Oh, yeah. So do I get a citation when you use that in a sermon?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
That's cool. Well, thank you for joining us. We've got one more movie that we're going to talk about. We're going to discuss A Hidden Life, directed by Terrence Malick. That's going to also lend to a discussion of some more artsy fartsy films. If you do have questions, we would love to answer them. I know that we took a little bit of a break, but we are still accepting those. So you can either leave a comment or you can email keaton.paul@pcazion.org.
That's right.
And that'll be in the show notes. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.